Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dr. Deep State. We're extremely excited about our show tonight. We're talking about the Catholic land movement, and we have the directors of the Catholic land movement with us here, and we're going to introduce them in just a moment. And we have John Carter with us, who's got a keen interest in this movement as well. So we're going to walk us through the major Catholic land movement in America. But give me just a minute, and I want to concentrate on our locals community, what we did, and it really does bring us into the idea of community and that theme for the evening. So I just want to take a minute and just mention the links are in the description. This community gets better and better and better, and I'm so excited about it. Before I even talk about that, thank you everybody for reading and reviewing the books and the fabulous reviews from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been a wonderful 3 weeks since the review. One of the big things, I don't want to get too far off here, but one of the big things we're exploring on locals that's kind of touchy on the regular channels is recognizing the big lie that's going on around us today and getting in the pattern of doing that. Everything from heliocentrism to macroevolution to this narrative that really in many ways is replacing Christ the King as we speak, as one empire seems to be eclipsing into another. And so we're talking about these sensitive topics to become aware, and we're doing it within light of our Catholic faith as a community. And that show last Friday really went over well. This week, we're talking about the icon versus the sigil, which is really a trigger point for creation of an egregore. One of the questions we went on to this week is we think about the empire of Christ. Christ is king as the icon. How is that being inverted in real time today through the sigil and sigil magic that creates these thought forms around us? The replies that we're going to go over Thursday and Friday have been spectacular. You all are, I'm talking to the people in my community, you guys are insanely so filling in all these spots. I absorb it, and it's just sometimes people try to create communities, and I've tried this in different I've been responsible as a professor for different community, and it's so hard. And it's something truly magic happens when you really get a community going. And with the events going on, and I ain't blackpilling anybody, the events going on in the world, paralleling the confusion in the church, just the idea of having a rail guard around these conversations, preparing spiritually, as well as what we're going to get into today with the land movement. But ultimately, this week, we're going to end with really looking at the development of these sigils in the world today. That one star one in particular, we have video this week of congregations, Christians bowing down to the star. Anyway, we're going to end on Friday with that. We also had a question this week. Why do people not want to talk about the synagogue? Why are they missing it? Why do they not want to defend the faith the way it has been defended for the first 19 centuries? One of the questions we asked this week is Catholic media. Basically, that term limited hangout just means you don't want to talk about it or connect the dots, everything that's going on in the church and the world, and connect it back in order to defend the church and defend our own faith. Finally, this week, one of the things in between two worlds, way back in 1970, Zbigniew Brzezinski tells us in this phase, we're going to have an uncoordinated citizenship using new magnetic technologies in an effort to manipulate emotions and control. And, it's long before the internet and social media and the algorithmic capture, seeing that. So we said, in that light of that, when we think of the transformation from the icon to the sigil, how is communication part of it and manipulating that process? But central to this ICE PSYOP, people that are not seeing this for this is this world police storm unit that's coming in. So we're really especially focused in between two worlds at the role when we connected all the dots this week between the insane, and we're going to increase, there's going to be a 2-part series on locals this week, the Mossad piece of the entire operation connected to the Palantir, and we're going through all the information. The beast system is on the ground, and it's very scary. And if people are missing this in terms of a breakdown of the world order system, the order of expectation and law in America, you're missing something very big. And this is why we're speaking about in community, to understand what is going on in the world, to have people to speak to get away from the fear. It's the development of this system, the technate system, where the fascism and communism are coming together into this new Palantir techno, I'll call it, at the end of our book here, we called it the Noahide digital surveillance slave system. Is essentially what they're creating. So it's all what Elon Musk has pushed all along. You're going to own nothing and love it. You're going to have a universal high income, because probably there are not going to be that many people left. But yeah, we went into it. They definitely are anti-communism and anti-fascism, because they've moved beyond it in the technique. They're a fusion of all those ideas, and Trump is leading the way. Can anybody stop him? The story of this week and for next week, they're saying it. What used to be a conspiracy theory, Don's New World Order. And he wants to go after multiple nations at one time. A lot of enemies he's making. What do you make of it? Well, one thing that we're noticing is that in Gaza right now, they want to put this technocratic, this technic government in place on the remains of the bodies over there. So finally, everybody that thought, well, he's going to take on the deep state, he's going to take on Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. Well, sure enough, weren't they all in cahoots all the time? He's going to be over there speaking, probably hanging out with Yuval Harari, talking about getting under people's skin. Who knows? But he was part of it all along, and it's kind of hard for some people to pull their consciousness out of that. But again, links are going to be on the description section. I am really excited to get things going, and I would like to begin. Before I want to really start with, oops, we dropped Michael here. Michael said, I just want to say hi to all you guys, and thank you so much for being here. Michael Thomas, please describe for people. I think people have heard bits and pieces, and some people maybe belong to a leg of this unit. What is the vision? What are you all about? And can you get us started on the Catholic land movement, please?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for having me on, John, Andrew. I'm looking forward to our conversation tonight. Well, the Catholic land movement has a long history, and it's about over 100 years old, and it finds its beginnings, its primordial beginnings in Rerum Novarum, right, which is a response to the rise of capitalism, in which Pope Leo XIII makes a natural law argument for the right to property, its productive use, associations, the dignity of labor, and the preferential treatment of the poor. So those are the themes of Rerum Novarum. And this kind of spills out on the scene in 1891. And several years later, several notable English Catholic essayists and polemicists and social philosophers pick up Rerum Novarum and begin to think, what does this look like in our contemporary post-World War I context? And they so you have this big change. You have the rise of communism. Our Pope sees it in 1891, and then you have this transition of the Great War, and then you have the English essayists and polemicists digesting Pope Leo's ideas and saying, "Wow, we need to have some type of response to this." Into that discussion of trying to form a principled response to Rerum Novarum and the contemporary conditions of the day, a Dominican friar kind of walks in, Father Vincent McNabb, and demands that the English men of the day not only respond in principle, but also respond in practical, right? So not only are we going to have a clear understanding of the principles that are motivating us, we are going to have goals tactics and action too. Like we are going to do this thing. McNabb and myself are both known for banging on the table and yelling potatoes and cabbage at people. So what was born from McNabb was, and his kind of demand of the English was the Catholic land movement. Now the principles that these Englishmen landed on in the 1920s, they give it a name. They call it distributism, and so they give distributism this principled polemic. And if I were to list the names, they would be familiar to people: Belloc, Chesterton, Penty, Williams. Who's the fallen out of fashion iconographer in a Gill. So in any event, there's a number of English essayists and philosophers who land on these principles that they decide to label distributism. I would love to get into a discussion about the principles of distributism on this podcast. It fancies itself a third way, not between, but a third position from liberal economics and communism.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea of third position becomes quite popular in the 1920s. We know, some other Europeans who pick up third position, namely fascists, and Mussolini and Hitler, really hold this idea that they're a third, that fascism is a type of third position, a negotiation between free capital and communism. Distributists hold something that's not a negotiation, but something separate altogether. That good social order is manifest by a prioritization of a wide holding of property and means of production by as many people as possible. That good social order would be inherent to this. And I'd love to get to the ideas that drive this subsidiarity of free will and reactionary kind of ethos against modernity. So there's tons to talk about. But in any event, McNabb, this Dominican friar, walks into this very heady discussion about economics and philosophy and theology and says to these men, we must prove in practice what we argue in principle. And from that, the Catholic land movement arises. And so what is the Catholic land movement? If our principles are that a good social order is one in which widespread private ownership of property is the baseline, and that property is that the people who own that property have the means for economic productivity and economic exchange with one another, we need to kind of change the way we're doing everything. And so the practical expression becomes these land associations, and the land associations set forth to educate people and associate people around private property and its productive use. And so the land associations, start training people in how to take oats to market, or how to take pigs to market, or how to, they become a type of a front for action that localizes economy, localizes authority, localizes culture, all in contrast to the vast, consolidation that was happening in other realms. The fascist, more faster, more violent call was a centralizing effort, and so here we have these distributists in England, and they're standing against the moral kind of ambiguity of liberal capitalism. They are standing against the consolidating state powers of fascism and communism. And they say there's a third way, which is this, widely distributed, privately held productive property and localized economy and culture. And so the land movement is very, very actually successful in England, Wales. It starts. McNabb was an Irishman, so it starts to go to Ireland. Distributism takes different routes in Spain and other places. You actually see in the Franco coalition, a consolidation of some distributists. In America, we see the Southern Agrarians We see the northern agrarians. There's a whole bunch of distributism and localism as it's come under in the contemporary kind of takes on a life pre-war. But then we all know what happens to Europe and in the 1930s and 40s, and the effort circumstantially, because of practicality, is largely derailed. Then post-war, we see a massive cultural buy-in into the space age and what I would call the myth of progress. We see the capitalist and communist victory over fascism, and then the subsequent world order that's established around liberal economy. And we know the key players who were motivating this, right? And so we see this consolidation of power around liberal markets and a type of globalism, mostly led by America. And this creates a rapid industrialization across a wide array of production, including agricultural production. And so we largely, everything since then has been a march towards technocratic consolidation. So we have this technocratic consolidation. Post-war, we have the space age, the myth of progress. They rip out the hedgerows and plant rows of corn with big machines, and the idea of like small local communities producing what they need primarily, and being associated in local and small economy kind of loses its favor. It disappears largely. It finds like weird footholds or strange footholds in like hippie communities and back to the landers, but it loses its Catholic ethos. Even Mother Earth, right? Like Mother Earth starts as a third position, in association with distributists and fascism. Like Mother Earth starts as like this magazine and this movement. I don't know if you're familiar with the Mother Earth magazine, but it actually has incredibly conservative or reactionary roots. Even the organic farming movement. If you look at the organic farming movement, incredibly reactionary third position roots. But then it changes, post-war it changes, and we see all these things migrate into like, counterculture. And then of course we have the Cultural Revolution of the 60s, and localism becomes the mantle somehow of the left wing, or the Cultural Revolution. And so then we have all these breakaway communities. They're not anchored in any type of morality. They're not anchored in any type of perennial truth. They're these kind of counterculture communities all over the place. They all fall to various degrees of moral decay and disorder, and the increasingly the technocratic globalism of libertarian economics continues to seize the world and establish monopolies and kind of like control everything. And we all know that just kind of keeps on going. It doesn't stop. There's the American hegemony.
The end of history.
Yes, yeah. Fukushima, yeah. Boy, are you wrong, buddy? And can't I wait to shoot you. But yes. This is the vogue of the philosophers of the day. We've reached the end of history, haha. And so Spengler disagrees, but nonetheless, we reach the end, and that carries on all the way. I would kind of argue it carries on all the way until COVID. So we get to the COVID period, and we see this. Oh boy, we can't curse on podcasts, but we see a test. We see a test of the people. We see a how far are people willing to accept an encroachment of technocratic tyranny through, the medical establishment that's been elevated to almost, theological status within the technocratic paradigm, right? How much are people willing to tolerate? And in that, people refuse. And it creates a reaction in people that I think had been building for some time, maybe in the hinterlands, maybe in the, esoteric, outer rings. But there becomes much more of a mainstream vein of populism that says this stuff, this technocratic consolidation that they're trying to pull with COVID, we're not doing it. And so you have this reaction again, and to essentially the tenets of modernity, the myth of progress. And I'd love to get into all this stuff, but and I'm giving you like a long, 20th century history right now, but I think it's important to the land movement. And so post COVID or during COVID, many people begin to feel and in their hearts that one, the myth of progress is a lie. That a forever march towards technology enabled by free capital is not the path towards our salvation or a good world. Mm-hmm. Two, the entire mythos of the 20th century that backs up that lie is garbage. And there's been a whole history constructed to support it. And any challengers from a third position are refuted like immediately with this history. So we have this reaction that comes about because of the medical tyranny of COVID, and it refutes the myth of progress. It refutes technocratic consolidation, and it says we are interested in like a localism of some kind. And you see this homesteading movement, and it's largely aesthetic. It's not. It's an aesthetic movement. You see it on Instagram and Twitter and other places. But that movement eventually finds the tenets of those English distributists from 100 years ago, and says, "Whoa, these things that we're feeling actually are grounded in some significant principle." And when coupled with the perennial truths that Catholicism offers in the witness of this, we can see the perennial truths right in the practical, right? Like 2 days ago with Pizzaballa, Cardinal Pizzaballa, and his refuting of the Zionist position, right? So like we see Catholicism like carrying over a sea of time those perennial truths that motivated the distributists, and then people in the contemporary like, well, not only do I not want to eat from some globalist, meat printing factory, and I want to grow food with my neighbors, but also that's supported and substantiated by Catholic social teaching. And the Catholic Church offers like this beautiful understanding of perennial philosophy that instructs a counter to all this stuff. And even if you look at and I'm sorry, I don't mean to just go on and on, but it's important to see the perennialism in Catholicism. Even I know he's unpopular in many reactionary circles or conservative circles, but even if you look at Pope Francis, half of Laudato Si is a refuting of the technocratic paradigm. Just if you look at the principles of the document, he intensely refutes the technocratic paradigm. And so, in any event, this truth of Catholicism kind of shines through and begins to take a foothold in people's minds and hearts, whether it's through aesthetic or a study of principles or a study of history. And then the same thing, just like McNabb came on the scene 100 years ago and demanded action, I hope that the land movement of the contemporary, as it comes on the scene, demands the same thing from people. Not only must we have these principles which refute the end of history and the idol that kind of I would argue that the inevitability of technological progress and the end of history is a false idol. So that's my argument. The land movement makes the same argument in yesteryear. Excuse me. The consolidation of power, property, capital is not good for people. The idea that economic liberalism and moral liberalism and religious liberalism is good for people, that the dissolvement of national borders is good. We refute this, right? So that these principles need a practical expression that is not just political, right? Because you in democracy and other places, you will get like populist demagogues, and I think I know who I might be talking about, right? You can get populist demagogues to kind of use this polemic to rally people. But these principled understandings of perennial themes that are true about human social order also need an expression that's not from the monopoly of violence and held by the state from top down, but also needs an aggregation from the bottom up, from the actual property holders and the people who produce things, the actual people. And it doesn't need to have a demagogue or a political polemicist, organizing it. It just needs to be organized by the people themselves. And so the land movement is an expression of that type of bottom-up cultural power that's saying, we understand these things to be true, widely held private property, productive, people with the ability to freely associate around that, and a moral order that is essentially Catholic or good or true, universal. I will substitute Catholic for all those things. That is what we should be aggregating, common power around. And so, in essence, I took you through a long talk right there. Yeah. Sorry if I talked for too long. It's good. But that is what the land movement is expressing. So, what does it look like in the contemporary? Well, there's 57 chapters. I think we're on the cusp of 60. There's, how many we have. What we focus on is local events and encounters where we reestablish a type of association between people around the education of peer-to-peer colloquial land and handcrafts, the acquisition of private property, the exchange and relationship and cultural life of people living locally and doing it within a morally formed ontology that is Catholic. And so that is what the Catholic land movement is facilitating. It's incredibly popular. Andrew can help, complement what I say here by the reality, veracity demands that I explain. It is incredible how many people have this desire to live something practical and authentic that counters the technocratic consolidation and the lie that they've been told around the myth of progress. People really, really have on their hearts, they have this deep desire to counter that, and they want to find their people who are doing that too, and they want to do it in a real way. And so the land movement kind of gives a rubric for action. You organize a chapter, you come into association with one another. We don't need to.
Looks like we got to skip. You guys are on, right?
Yeah, we're still on here. I can pick up.
Let me pick up. Let me pull Michael down for just a minute. And before I want to get to you, Andrew, and you can fill that in. I think John's got some ways that he understands how Father Fahey's view probably matches this movement. Let me see. I want to get Mike back on. Is he back on here? Mike, can you hear us? Okay. So a quick comment I have, what I like about what I'm hearing, when you hear patterns in late stage capitalism and late stage empire, there's certain social characteristics that come about, which are, let me see if I got him here. Mike, do we have you? In late stage capitalism and late stage empire, which are low trust societies, atomized individuals that they don't want to invest in family society. It's actually quite a dismal way of life. And what I like about the principles of this movement and what I hear discussed here is the idea that we work here that classic social order is base reality. The Christ the King, where all social and economic organizations were lifted up to Christ the King. And obviously we've been discoupled through classical liberal economics. But what this seems to be doing is taking those, here we go. We got you back. What I hear, Michael, is I want Andrew and John to respond. In late stage capitalism and late stage empire with atomized individuals, low trust societies. People do feel in their hearts something's wrong. They've had a glimmer of light in their life and they see the path forward. They're not trusting the people around them. They're seeing the big lie. They're looking for answers. What you're offering, what I see is, I see it's the only true truth. If base reality is Christ the King, classical social order, and we're decoupled from that, the key elements that you need to get right to create a trust society at the micro level are elements of integralism and subsidiarity. So that's built into your model. So we can have, as a community, as we're learning and bumping around how the distribution aspect, the production aspect works, the communal prayer works, we can actually, I mean, it gets exciting. Actually, I have goosebumps saying that we live in a micro world where we're offering everybody up. It's not just Christ is King in my heart, but in our community, we're really fashioning something. And that's the exciting part about late stage capitalism and people seeing through the big lie, is we can start. And when we know when these communities happen, when they're building, people get imaginative, they get creative, they want to share, they want to trust, they want to love, they want to invest in family. So Andrew, I'll take you, I'll have you
Sure.
take it there, please.
Yeah, Dr. High, I think that was a great, comment there to add color to what Michael said. And, it's funny you say you have goosebumps. I mean, I know a sign of the Holy Ghost is tears, but maybe it's goosebumps. I know that, the Holy Ghost is operating within Catholic Land Movement. Not only because of, the experiential aspect of my involvement over the past, 4 or 5 years or so, but in 1933, the Pope offered an apostolic blessing specifically to Catholic Land Movement. So this movement's blessed by the church. It doesn't just, it's not, the Mike and Andrew show or what have you. It's a 100-year-old organization. It belongs to every Catholic. We're simply part of a restoration movement. And we're just here to, at least for the time we're here, to help shepherd it, because it's important for the future. It's important for the church. It's important for families. It's important for souls moving forward. And so, and so maybe to hone in more on what you're touching on, why is it, okay, the only, from the standpoint of praxis, the true way forward in the state that we're in currently in history, because it's just touching on perennial truths that don't change about what happens when Catholics exist in the world, in that we associate, in that we come together. In the early church, everything was laid at the feet of the apostles. So part of the body of Christ is for instance, you can't get baptized. You can't baptize yourself. You need to be part. Someone in the body needs to bring you into the mystical body of Christ. We're here to live as a body, and so the natural flourishing of small Catholic community, these little Christendoms, are touch points of humanity. They're touch points of entering into the real, of being grounded, of reading, as Saint Bonaventure would say, the book of creation, right? Communing with God through reading his creatures, reading the divine logos through his creatures, not having any mediation between real things, stewarding them, right? Living in the dignity of the image of God. And so, but doing that, as the same Saint John the Apostle says in 1 John, doing so, how do we know that we crossed from death into life if we love the brethren? Doing something, not just being part of, it's great to be part of a men's group or so on and so, but or whatever. But what are we doing together? And how are we associating together? How are we living together? How are we loving one another together in a practical way, where we're living together, we're working together? Catholic Land Movement, has historically represented that. It currently represents that. And when the time comes, what's going to be standing? Like in the last day, monasteries and domestic monasteries. Like those are going to be the last places, domestic monastery being domestically productive households. So the land is essential. And maybe I'll, just two more things,
Sure.
offer more color on what Michael said was, he brought up Pope Francis. He brought up, Laudate Si. And, one interesting thing, despite what we've been through over the past century through the church in the rise of, liberalism and its effect on the world and the church at large, and, the uncrowning of Christ. But, it's interesting that even in the encyclicals that keep coming forth, from Rome, the perennial thread of a refutation of liberal economics is still found. That it can still be seen there is a great thing,
Yeah, I agree.
and whatever rest of it. So anyway, that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah.
And unto revealing a third principle, a third way, right? So it's just interesting that we could still see that, and that's a good thing. We could rejoice about it. And then I think when you're saying why personally, it's the real, right? So it's almost a mercy in what we're facing in the technocratic world that we're living in, technocratic tyranny that we're engaging in, and that we're experiencing, and that we're all suffering under, and the industrialization, and what that does to the family, what that does to the individual, what that does to the worker. It's a mercy to oneself to cultivate the land.
Absolutely.
In the soil, you find the mercy of God, as Pope Leo XIII says. And so it's our task, it's the Catholic Land Movement's mission to help Catholics get there through how Mike, always says very well what the mission of Catholic Land Movement is: learning skills, rural resettlement, to help Catholics along the way. And so it's growing rapidly. It's growing with a lot of beautiful Catholic families. And so we're just happy to chat about it, and also find opportunities. As Mike was explaining, Catholic Land Movement Texas is very, very strong. And so we look forward to continuing conversation with you gentlemen, and advancing the social kingship of Christ.
Excellent. Excellent. And I know John's probably got some questions, and I think Father Fahey really fits into this really well. One of the larger ideas in Father Fahey, as he talks about the reorganization of society, in a few of his books, he'll mention like 7 principles of God and 7 principles of Satan. And what you guys are saying are the core principles. Private property is key. We don't always think that, and maybe, liberation theology blurs that a little bit. But that element of what classical economics is a truth that is embraced in classical Catholicism and social movement. But there's a number of other movements in there. And so as postmodernity, as late stage, I think the 20th century was late stage capitalism. We're at the 5-yard line there. It's abstraction into simulacrum. And there's so many people that have lost so much touch with reality and being, which is Christ. And part of this, like you're saying, now it's a trendy saying to say touch grass, touch trees, but it's very real. We desire it. The fullness of our being thirsts for it if we really want truth in Christ. And I think a lot of people, it resonates with a lot of people as the system is moving us into sort of a pure simulacrum, the goal of which is to be completely separated from the Catholic sacramental economy of reality. So that's a lot to say, but that is the goal of the enemy, the World Economic Forum. It's like against and oppose this. So really, this is an opposition to every other thing, because every other thing outside of the Catholic social order, it's variations, but nothing's got it right. This is base reality, and this movement is hitting on the principles. So there could be some sort of liberal, spontaneous coordination, but it's grounded in these principles. And with that, as you're growing your chapter and your units, that's the centralizing theme that kind of makes it go in its particulars. And that's why it has these elements of integralism. John, please, you must, I know you always have a lot of interesting insights on your own. And Fahey, what are you thinking about all this?
Well, thinking more of the big picture, I guess.
Mhm.
I mean, I admire the Catholic land movement. I'd love to learn a lot more about it. I mean, it's extremely intriguing, but I'm coming at it from my perspective of kind of being on my own in ranching for a long time in the United States and in Brazil, and as my vocation. And my vocation is I'm a farmer. I raise grass for cows to turn into beef, and I'm a steward of the land. I'm a shepherd, and you go back to the Holy Family, and there's a tie to the land. I mean, I feel connected. My spiritual life is it thrives when I'm outside. I find myself praying all the time. My thoughts are always turned to God. Thank you, Lord, for giving me this cow. Or thank you, Lord, for this horse. Thank you for the rain. And it's there's an intangible to it, but reality. Let's go from philosophy to topography. Go back to the ground. Um, we're fighting a rear guard action, and it's 500 years of the looting machine in Catholic England and the looting that went on there, and the establishment of an aristocracy in the American South that mimicked England in a lot of ways. That was in counter to the Northeastern industrialists. So, if you look at the agrarians as an example, Mike mentioned them, called the fugitives. My grandmother knew them really well. She went to school with them, with a lot of them. Robert Penn Warren, Lytle, and they're contemporaries. Flannery O'Connor, later Wendell and they were riding.
Richard
Yeah,
Weaver, he's my favorite of the
Yeah.
book group. Yeah,
I love them. Yeah, and they wrote a series of essays called "Who Owns America: A New Declaration of Independence," and it and then you look at their view. They're the only ones who talked about against capitalism, other than Marxist, and that's like Laudato Si is a Marxist version. Leonardo Boff and Dom Pedro Calzadilla, two Marxists that wrote that for Francis. It has a lot of similarities. I think that's where the rubber meets the asphalt. Is in essence, they were riding after 60 years of having their land stolen, and getting demolished to the South. These people and trying to save and salvage, in its essence, was this agrarian lifestyle, based on Episcopalian more than anything, of course, but nevertheless that culture migrated to Texas after the war, whereby it's common and used to be more common than today that you're always helping your neighbor. You're sharing your time. You're helping build fences. You're gathering calves together at ropings in May. That's the spring roundup, and so that essence has been just absolutely obliterated by the Rockefeller, Ray Goldberg, long teeth input-output business plan from Harvard in the 1950s to industrialize and wipe out private property, wipe out family-owned farms in the United States. So here we are talking about trying to do something to consolidate. I don't like to say rearguard action. I think we're in a kind of a rollover position as this stuff rolls over us. We pop up in the 2030s, 34, 35 in that time, and take it back. So that's my whole thought is, how am I going to keep my land? Everything that I've got, I spend more time now dealing with administrative stuff, bureaucracy. We're constantly monitored by satellite. In Brazil, it's the R to B system. You can't do anything. You cannot do anything without them knowing. And the fines come automatically. They lock your bank account. You're guilty before proven innocent, and you really don't own the land anymore. You're just really a serf. So that's where I can see that system being implanted in the United States. It's coming in fast and furious. The prototype was built in Brazil, so I have that background of that terrorism, that tyranny there. And then coming back to here, I'm thinking big picture. We're going to go through hell, and it's going to be hard to hang on to the land. If we don't have a community, you're going to get picked off, one by one. And I think that community aspect is probably the most important aspect of the Catholic land movement to me, because I don't want to be in an organization with Freemasons. And that's kind of what you're left up to in Central West Texas, where I live. And if you could consolidate Catholics that think, that's the hard part. That's what I would like to kind of dive into, is how do you choose the people to come in? Because then it comes into a whole different aspect of who's going to own the land, what skilled labor markets, and how we survive as agriculture is getting imploded. Today, right now, at this moment, soybean farmers and corn farmers, their break evens are about 10 to 15% less than the market spot price. I mean, it's going to be devastating. We're down to from 6-7 million ranches, private family-run ranches, to down to 500,000 today, and they're dropping by 20 to 50,000 a year. Depends on the year. So this is certainly a rearguard action. And Father Fahey, what I love about his book, The Church and Farming, is, we can't get into it too deep, but it's one thing: return to order. We provide a foundation to return to order and hold on to the land, even if they try to stop you from producing food, which they're gonna come and try to stop you from producing everything. And that's where I see this land movement really coming together behind the rosary instead of behind a weapon, because the only other alternative is to get together with all the guys in my counties up here. They're militias. They're putting militias together. It's like, dude, you're gonna get wiped off the map. And how to have that Catholic response. And what is the Catholic response? And 1933, 100 years is coming up, and that's a big anniversary, 2033. We all know what that means. So I think that there is certainly, from what I can tell, that 100 years of preparation for y'all to perfect the model. You have 57 chapters. I think it's the only thing we can do, frankly, from my point of view. So
That was really great, John.
Mhm.
And we see the controlled demolition right now in real time, and the culprits are even telling us who they are. We see it in Argentina, we see it in Chile, we see it in Venezuela. You see it firsthand. Places being burnt down and bought up for pennies on the dollar by people that have a plan. It used to be called Agenda 21, then it's Agenda 30. It'll probably be Agenda 45 before they own everything to bring back the machine. This, it sounds like I'm making this up. I'm not. So there's a plan in place. All I'm going to quickly say is that what I feel about this movement is, because it's rooted in, you use the word perennial. I'm not afraid of that term. I think when people get together for Christ and his church, there's going to be grace and alternatives and these possibilities. And we see the darkness and you have faith.
Yes.
And I'll let you take it away from there, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many things that resonate so strongly with what, with the work of the land movement, my heart and witness that I want to share. John, I was trying to find the list. Who Owns America is a compliment to, I'll Take My Stand by the Southern Agrarian. There are several English distributists who write essays in Who Owns America. And so that idea of that, those distributists, those English distributists, and the Southern, the classical Southern society, which, I like the idea that it's taken refuge in Texas. It's an interesting idea, but I also share it's taken refuge in Texas, but is there a type of Protestant or Masonic influence that somewhat pressures that in Texas as well? Yeah. So 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 there's just so many things I want to say. Gratiam said perfecta, grace naturam, grace perfects nature, right? And so when but that's Aquinas, that's Thomas Aquinas, grace perfects nature. One of the things that the land movement is attempting to do, and it's very explicit in what we say, so it's not like we're hiding this from people. We are trying to bring people back into contact with the real on any level, from where they are with what they have, because the land movement understands that if you the touch grass is the rhetoric for the the meme of the day, but we facilitate a restoration of the real in people's lives and associations with their neighbors and within their parish. We compel people to touch and take their rightful position of dominion and stewardship in the created order and experience it. Because when they do that, when natural order pours into their life and they begin to see, right, Christ, our Lord, talked to us in parables of agriculture, and I think it's like 87% of our Lord's parables are agricultural parables. He spoke to us of a life that was in close contact with the created order willed by the Father, right? And so in the created order, I think, John, to what you're saying, you're a cattleman, right? And I get that you go out there and see your cattle, but if you talk to even like your most fallen away Catholic or even atheist, and you ask them where they feel they're most connected to something mystical and sacred, they're going to say, when I go out to a mountain, or when I sit in nature, or when I, look at the natural order, right? And so what the land movement is attempting to do is through an association of your neighbors, through that natural compelling of sociality, which is like a natural disposition that all humans have. Through that, we are going to aggregate people around contact with nature, but not just contact with nature in the American sense, where like nature is some separate Thoreauian thing that we just experience and like it's pristine and separate from us. No, we are going to, I love that you've used the word, Doctor, integrate, right? We are going to integrate our experience with nature with our temporal needs in our labor, in our economic order, in our political order. And when we do that, when we come into close contact with natural order, and we are fearless in how we integrate it across a whole realm of human experience, we invite the perfection of grace. And Catholicism just comes in with its kind of full power. And so that is what we're doing. And so John, to liberalism, and you'll get like in from your HR department or whoever else it is, right? We have to be accepting of all things, and we have to be invite all peoples, and all religions are equal, and blah blah blah, and whatever it is, right? All cultures are equal, all this garbage that we get fed in modernity. Like the Catholic land movement is saying it is just and right to just have an association of Catholics. Like I only want Catholics here, and not only do I only want Catholics, but I want Catholics who are compelled towards a deep participation with natural order, who are compelled to a deep and a read and interpretation of the perennial themes of our social teaching, right, and who are deeply integrated to the liturgy, right? That the liturgical life is one that they are attempting to integrate. Yeah. So the Catholic land movement is all about integrating the themes of back to Father Fahey and the social kingship of Christ, right? Like our liturgical life, our economic life, our temporal needs, our social life, all of these things need to be integrated, and we need to prepare for the conquering of Christ over all of it, right? That's our goal as Catholics. And so this kind of orientation is precisely what the Catholic, like you go to one of our events and we're gonna all get together, we're gonna like butcher a pig, we're gonna all like hang out and talk about what we're doing on our various homesteads, or what our hopes are, or hey, I'm a young guy and I don't have a spot. Anybody who, wants to take a farm worker on, or somebody who wants, ranch help or something. And then we're going to end with like the rosary or a traditional
Wow.
compliment, or so, like every single land movement event. This is what I instruct in leadership cultivation. You are integrating land, God, and community, right? So you are integrating these three things in every single one of your events. And God
Beautiful.
is liturgy, prayer, and sacraments, right? That's how you're going to do it. Land is, skills, contact, and like real communion, like consuming things together, producing things together.
Mhm.
And then community is sincere association, meeting the whole person, not just counting someone on a nonprofit spreadsheet that we serve some corporal need, but actually incorporating the whole person's experience. When someone comes to a land movement chapter, the leadership is like, what is this person's talents? What's their professional talents? What are their personal circumstances? What are their needs? How do I serve them and integrate them into the life of the chapter, right? You're trying to like witness people holistically. In so much of modernity, we're atomized, or we're fit into a technocratic system, and the land movement is attempting to obliterate that through a restoration of the real, holistic, and integral encounter of like what it means to be human: spiritual life, social life, temporal life, economic life, political life, integrating all of those things into the life and into the kind of action of a chapter. And so again, it is a powerful answer to liberal, contemporary Americanism. It's a powerful answer to all of like the technocratic tyranny that we experience. You can sometimes, we think like too far ahead, and fear and other things can like leak in. If we just ground ourselves in small acts in association with people that integrate land, God, and community, the Holy Ghost will enter those spaces and take it away, especially if you're inviting the ecclesiastical through a liturgy and sacraments. If you complement it with that grace, like it's going to take it away. And that's what we're attempting to facilitate, where everything we're doing is motivated with a real like witness and love of Christ, rather than like a fear or even confrontation of what's, all these various errors. It's just living in the immediate kind of presence of, I love my brother, I love God, I love the mercy that God shows me in the land, and I love my brother in my association with him to reap that mercy by the sweat of my brow. That's what we're facilitating in the land movement. And so yeah, I don't know, it's I'm going on, but that's I feel like the things I heard from both you, Doctor, and John, like that was just kind of like a better explanation of what the land movement's trying to cultivate in response to the themes.
And Andrew wants to pick up on that. The word reality, we always define it here as something hierarchical, sacramental, and historical. And the thing is, we're not recreating the wheel here. It's tied to something that's always been. As you're describing this, Michael, this would be my most perfect way to live. The antithesis of this, when I talked about the agenda of 2021, 2030, 2000, probably 45. It's these smart cities. Trump is calling them freedom cities. If anybody's getting the pattern here, it's these 15-minute stack and pack. This to me is straight from the devil. It's the opposite of what we're saying. It's not historical. It's not sacramental. It's, you could call it communistic or fascistic state planning. And it's basically a fancy way of putting you in a prison and deciding in the meantime who dies and who lives. And that is from the devil, these people that are planning this. So this is the antidote to that. I think some people, we use words like spectacle in here, are going to be so lost that they'll just want the comfort and take that easy way. when you talk about the walking in faith and the grace is going to happen for the people that dare to get out of the comfort zone and into the plan, because it will have a grace over it, because it's a tied to all those things you said that come together in that integral order. The sacramentality, it is historical, and it's grounded in those principles, and it is comporting to a hierarchy that's always been in heaven, and it's being recreated there in each community. Andrew, please go take it from there.
Yeah, and Mike, said the way he described it at the end there was, I think, really good, in that it is very, for the people involved in Catholic land movement, the many traditional Catholics involved, it is actually a simple intention. And the world is full of complexity, and we can be full of complexity. But it's a good thing to have a simple, good intention. And that's what many of the people in Catholic land movement have. Simply to do what's right, to love God, to practice, acts of faith, hope, and charity, to live a good life on the land with one's family, to love one's brethren on our way towards heaven. It's a very simple intention. I think it's important also to foster that simplicity of that intention.
Yeah.
But at the same time, right, sacred scripture is vast. There's so many, God's word is endless in its infinite, goodness and beauty and wisdom. We also are not afraid to, right, simultaneously recognize that Father Vincent McNabb was a prophet, and he would also talk about and warn people to leave the cities. Okay, so it's multi-form. I mean, there is a very beautiful, simple intention. And John, you asked, how do you choose, like, the Catholics who come, and who are the Catholics who are part of this? And many Catholics are, majority, it's just a phenomenon, are attending traditional liturgy. They're praying the rosary. They're just being Catholics. They're being traditional Catholics in their home, and something stirs in them, and they come. But so they have a simple intention, but at the same time, in the spirit of Father Vincent McNabb, in his prophetic voice during the time, Catholic land movement also is not afraid to acknowledge the fact that you need to make a choice right now. The world is already controlled by a technocratic tyranny that is atheistic, that has apostatized, that has emerged from an apostasy of nations, is controlled by people who are enemies of Christ, and ultimately those powers on earth are controlled by powers and principalities of forces of darkness, and St. Paul teaches that. So at the same time, we have a simple intention to love God, but at the same time, we're wise as serpents and innocent as doves, and recognize that, and will voice as the voice crying out in the wilderness, quite literally, make a choice. Make a choice what you will do, and where you will go, and where you will raise your family, because the cities are wicked. They are sin, and you need to make a choice. And because they're going to get worse, find, and I'm just speaking as a son of Father Vincent McNabb, right? I'm just leaning on him and standing on his shoulders, and so I encourage many to read his work and to dive into his work. He was a loving Dominican priest. He was a simple man. He was a man of poverty. He was a man of evangelical poverty, and he tenderly loved God, but he also had understood the signs of the times. And that's what I really enjoy about your books and your podcast, Dr. Haugen, is you are a voice crying in the wilderness. You're telling people, and you're explaining to Catholics, look, in our time here on earth, what we have, the scriptures tell us we have 70, 80 years. How are we going to spend our time? We need to make a choice. But, John, the type of Catholics, I think that's twofold. It's, what does Catholic land movement look for? The fact that you're Catholic and that you desire to learn. Like that's the bar of entry for Catholic land movement chapters and national conferences. But I think perhaps, I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you were getting at was more of how do you choose a local community, right? And that's a totally different question. And I think that's up to different individual, right, leaders within Catholic land movement that have the experience, that have been farming for a long time, have been through it. I mean, if anyone is going to enter into Catholic land movement and they're going to farm for 3 years and seriously do it, and they last, that's pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive if you're going to be on a farm for 3 years straight and experience the woes and that you can simultaneously carry a good marriage, raise children, and then also produce food for your family, just starting there, not even talking about enterprise. That's a display of virtue. That is a display of virtue. And objectively, a man of virtue is someone that I can trust. And so when it comes to a local chapter, it's as those emerge, it's really, I can only speak personally. Someone who attends ancient liturgy, someone who's virtuous, someone who's demonstrated, someone who's my brother, someone who I trust. And so, Catholic land movement isn't in the business of building these planned communities, obtaining raw land, building houses, putting them on Zillow, or putting them on Catholic network, telling everyone time to move on land. No, we're not. This isn't the mission that we're engaged in. We're acting swiftly, but we're also acting prudently. And Mike, I'm not sure if you want to offer some more on just the strategy of what that looks like, because I appreciate John's question on how does it actually work practically.
Yeah, one of the things just in definitions, I always like having like a shared lexicon in discussions, especially as modernity so often tries to like change the meaning of things. And so just as the way that I understand community is a community is a people who share practical dependencies in a locality. Everything else is an interest group, right? Even land movement is like an interest group. We're Catholics who are aggregating an interest in agrarianism and kind of Catholic ontology, into our lives. But essentially, we're with all the organizing that happens, we're largely an interest group that hasn't consolidated. Not in some places it has, but in other places it hasn't. We're seeking the consolidation into a community where we can actually share dependencies, but practical, real dependencies like our water, our food, our land, our border. These are shared and they're integral to our identity as people. But a lot of people don't have that right now, right? So I think it's very important to clarify what community is, because modernity will have you believing community is some people you interact with on the internet. And that is an interest group. You share interests, but community are people who are defending a border, who are, dependent on the same soil, the same water, the same, places. And so the restoration of Catholic community doesn't just happen overnight, especially crawling from the wreckage of modernity. It necessitates a slow build of association. So I've talked to the Catholic land movement's brought me into association with lots of different people. And often you get this funny thing where the modern intellect believes that it can buy community, particularly people with a ton of money. We can solve all the woes of modernity if we can all come together on a piece of land and we'll cut it up and we'll buy it. We'll buy proximity and then community will just magically happen. Well, there's a reason why over the past 100 years you don't see any of those communities. None of them actually last, and so the real communities that have lasted are often ones that are integrated, with a whole suite of what we would call like modern circumstances, but the people themselves have real relationships and intensely shared traditions, histories, borders, dependencies. Those are actually communities. And so the while they're Protestant, the Amish, the Mennonites, various ethnic communities can really show us that this
Yes.
is what community is. And so a restoration of Catholics in that type of community order necessitates the slow build of association. And while it's not as modernity, because of the marketers and the various people who control the markets and they want to convince you that you can buy your desire. So you want community, you can buy it, right? I can sell you community. We're going to see a lot of this, selling of community by
timeshares.
yes, by various people. And so the land movement is saying that quite explicitly that you must come into slow association and relationship, and those associations and relationship must integrate shared temporal dependencies, borders, liturgical spiritual life, moral formation. These things must be shared. They must be shared in a locality. And that will create a slow build of community. But it's starting kind of like with what we have from where we are out of the wreckage of modernity. And so it's not as like, we're a bunch of pioneers and we're going to go buy a piece of land in Arkansas somewhere. I'm not singling you out, Arkansas. We love you, Arkansas. I'm just saying, or Missouri or wherever it is. We're not going to like carve this perfect community out of nowhere and Benedict option ourselves or whatever the fad is right now.
Okay.
We are attempting to restore sincere association and relationship that then grows slowly into real community. And we're doing that within parish structure, right? So we're not a canonical, we can get into like a whole discussion of two swords and do sunt and other things. I'd love to have the time to do that. But we are a civic association, not a canonically established lay association of the faithful. We are a civic association attempting to aggregate Catholics on the temporal authority side to the social kingship of Christ by starting with whatever meager position we have and beginning to associate with one another, that then build that to real community association and eventually like national and even a long, deep history like ethnic identity. But we are attempting to reestablish that. And so that's largely been obliterated by modernity. And one of the virtues is hope. One of the virtues is fortitude. One of the virtues is courage. And so with the land movement, we're attempting to give people a rubric of association that creates a kind of foundation and groundwork where they can, again, begin the restoration of community, which I will bang on the table. You can't buy it. You can't have some HOA community where you just buy it. Community arises over long-term association, shared morality, shared dependencies, shared spiritual life. And if you don't build those things, then community will not arise. And so that's what the land movement's like basement, right? Unfortunately, back to the rear guard thing, John, I would just say not the apocalypse of the Bible, but the temporal apocalypse has already happened. Like they destroyed everything. They destroyed it all. and we have to. There's vestiges of it, and Catholicism offers one of those
Absolutely.
golden seeds. And so we have to carry that seed, and we have to begin to associate with our brothers and sisters, and then find the fertile ground in which to plant it, and grow slowly with hope, with charity to people who come to us, and with a consistent focus on Christ, and His direction. Love each other and love God. And that's what the land movement is attempting to facilitate. People in place. John, Dr. Haugen, I love your insistence that hierarchy is a component of order. This is the Catholic understanding, right? So a restoration of community hierarchy and organizational hierarchy, right? The land movement really embodies those things in our rubrics. We don't have enough time tonight to get into all the specifics and details, but there's been a ton of thought into and really just carried by Andrew and myself and the other people involved. There's a huge body of Catholic social teaching that instructs what we're doing. And again, the integration of God, land, and people, private property, free association around its productive use, the insistence on the moral order of Catholicism and the kingship of Christ in the civic authorities. This is it. This is the beacon. If we've been instructed, and we have to follow it. And that's what the land movement's doing.
I'll just add two things real quick. One, Paul says God causes the growth, and then they harvest. Now, he was talking about souls, but the analogy fits with what we're looking at. God causes the growth. We come in and we look at the good works that God has done in souls throughout Catholic land movement chapters, and then whatever resources we can bring to help those associated Catholics to bring about a little Christendom, we're there to help. Here's an example. In Western PA, a Catholic has donated several $1 million for that exact project to come about. It's happening. It's not just a big network and a big association. It also is folding into the resources, right? People with various gifts are going to be part of this effort, and it's occurring, and it's very exciting. It's hopeful, and there's more to come. And so we appreciate your interest and your involvement. And, it sounds like, we align on the path forward. And so it's good to be with our Catholic brothers here tonight.
If I could just illuminate like an important parallel, if you look at the distributists of the 1920s, they stood in opposition to communism and fascism. If we look in the contemporary to the various worships of the technocratic order and the kind of idol status of the state, and we look at the demagoguery of the contemporary, we can find again the modern distributists within the Catholic land movement standing against those very same things in the contemporary. And I don't know much about the podcast, but seeing your intro, what I saw of your intro, like I in some of your statements, Doctor, like I see you standing against that as well, right? And so it's incredibly important. There is a specific a duty, I feel, that the Catholic has to stand against the rise of state tyranny, the rise of demagoguery that would pervert or disorder the third position. And we must come into association, and we don't need to confront it from the top down. I'm not suggesting that we run political parties, at least with the land movement. The land movement is specifically saying we're not interested in top down a seizure of civic authority. It's important. People who want to do that, go for it. The land movement is specifically looking for the aggregation of bottom-up cultural power. How do we play music with each other? What kind of music do we listen to? What kind of food do we eat? Who grows our food? What are our marriage traditions? What are our land traditions? What are our labor traditions? What are our seasonal traditions? Aggregating all of those things through the life of a chapter, or just, Catholics in an area, for bottom-up power to then implement the social kingship of Christ. We're not, it's very important that bottom-up aggregation exists, and there's very few places where it's happening. You can see some of it like in classical schools, or you can see some of it in there's people who are approaching usury from financial aspects. There's Catholics who are doing other aspects of like this bottom-up aggregation. The land movement is specifically focused on private property and its productive use. So that's where, to bring it really to the practical, it's like, I'm a Catholic and I want to learn how to, do pork on my land. Who do I go to? Do I go to the, Wicca permaculturist, or do I go to the guy who wants to sell me a $5,000 workshop, or do I go to my neighbor? Is there somebody who's waved a banner and aggregated that my neighbor Joe down the road knows how to butcher a pig, or knows how to, take in hay, or knows how to do row cropping, or knows how to, process a cow, or do, chicken coop, or make cheese, or dip candles. I could just go on and on and on and on and on. Do Catholics have an access point for those very, very basic skills that bring them into a close association with productive property and the natural order inherent in it? And we need a banner to wave to kind of associate those people. And that's what the land movement is.
I'm going to have John tie everything together, but it was just such a fabulous introduction. And when you look at secular history, when markets crash, economic, social chaos and disorder, the upside is new life springs about. There's a pattern consistently in communities like this have a life force that's so new and fresh that reflects everything you guys have talked about tonight. So when we see these things, and it's a good idea for people to start thinking in this direction and hearing the principles and how they're tied to, I think, essentially the classical Catholic social order, which we say here is base reality. John, can you please finish us off? And Andrew might have some last idea here as well he'd like to get in.
Sure. Mike, Andrew, I'm extremely impressed. And everything you said is kind of what I said. I wish we could do something like this, but I was a little bit
Really
ignorant.
well presented, you guys.
Yeah, and I think that what I like is keep it simple, stupid, build a network first. You have to have a unifying force somewhere. I mean, otherwise we're all going to get popped off on our individual hills. And then you build that community, build the concept over time. And as you said, once we unite, there's no doubt that that we're going to have lots of graces pouring in, and we are supposed to act fearlessly. And I'm a part of a group that's made up of the enemy, and it's at Harvard. And I'm not going to go too much in it. They'll shoot me. But it's 100 people, including CEOs, the top conglomerates in the world for food, and then it includes the human genome research, the top people in that, the people in it's madness. And the guy that leads it, Ray Goldberg, he was a Rockefeller man in the 50s, and he was responsible for the Green Revolution, this whole industrialization of agriculture. And it was specifically in their business plan to eliminate the family farm in the United States and consolidate to the hands of the corporations and use food as a weapon for U.S. foreign policy, etc. So when I'm sitting there listening to them in 2019 saying that there will not be beef on American plates in 2030, and they weren't asking permission, they were saying this, and they were showing presentations how it's going to happen, something really big has to happen between now and then. And so be it. We know kind of where we stand on the battlefield. But, what it did to me was like, well, I'll be damned. Not on my watch. I mean, no way. And that fearlessness that you mention, Mike, is I think it's an elite fearlessness when you're backed by your faith and not by a 44, and I think that's when the graces are going to flow in. Because everyone else is out here running around. I got a neighbor who's got a 50 cal and he has a driveway that's over 500 yards long. And he has it in his front door. He goes, when they come in, I'm going to bust their, I said, dude, they're going to get you with a drone. Um, and not that it's going to come to that, but I think that the everything has collapsed. The faith is, absolutely been blown up with the Claymore mine, and we're unifying back at the very least common denominator, which is the land and food. And if we don't unite, then we certainly will not be able to sustain what's coming in the future. And I think by this, what you're offering is it's absolutely brilliant. It's simple. And Father Fahey and Father McNabb, I mean, goodness sakes, what a tradition to have, this Irish Catholic priest. And what's crazy is that his last book that he wrote, Father Fahey, was The Catholic Church and Farming. He talks about Fabianism, consolidation of food. I'm reading everything that we're talking about and the solution. And the solution is what you're doing. And trying to become a Quaker and go out and buy land and get together communally, no thank you, because half won't work and someone else is going to pull all the, it's a different concept. And where I live, in my neck of the woods, there's not a whole lot of Catholics, especially in agriculture, but the ones that are, we know each other. And I think part of what you're offering is an ability to, through that invitation, through farming and ranching and building that community, also to help educate them on what's going on. Because, I mean, not very many people can have this conversation. They're looking at you with like a deer in the headlights. And so I think that's really, you're to be commended. And I'm tickled to have a chance to talk to you, and I would love to be a part of it however I can help.
Yeah. And before I go and kind of pull things together with you, Andrew, there's so many people, especially when I get off of this podcast, this community, and I'll do a show, and some people are kind of new to this information about the uni party and that they control through lying. This is just how the world kind of works, but people are waking up, and there's that kind of thing. Well, what do I do if I can't vote? This is where it's a part of suffering, seeing the process of wiping out this direction and fake reality. But with this, these are the things you can really do. And, nothing can be, you guys were saying, as far as being in nature, that sense of whether you're a mystic or a traditional Catholic, that there's something special there. But if you want to take it to the next level, being productive in nature and sharing and having the capacity that it's just difficult in late stage capitalism to really put another's needs before yourself. That is a taste of transcendence. And that's what you guys are offering to people. And that's such a great promise that's hooked onto the promise of Christ and his new heaven and the new earth. And the enemy is taking us into stack and packs, a world of alone with our amusements until death and destruction have their way on our souls. Andrew, do you want to kind of tie some things together for us?
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Haugen, and thanks, Sean. And Mike, you were explaining what's in the hearts and minds of people within Catholic land movement. And John, you got at it and you commented and you used the terminology, this elite, what is it, confidence, or what that springs from faith. And it reminded me of, the divine office, the traditional divine office. This reading, it was perfect. It was today, and it was in Hebrews, and Paul is talking about the saints of old. He's talking about the patriarchs and prophets of the Old Testament, and he says, who by faith conquered kingdoms, wrought justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouth of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, recovered strength from weakness, became valiant in battle, put to flight the armies of foreigners. Women received their dead raised to life again, but others were racked, not accepting deliverance, that they might find a better resurrection. and others had trials and mockeries and stripes, moreover also of bands and prisons. They were stoned, they were cut asunder, they were tempted, they were put to death by the sword, they wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being in want, distressed, afflicted, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering in deserts and mountains and in dens and in caves of the earth. And all these, being approved by the testimony of faith, received not the promise, God providing some better thing for us, that they should not be perfected without us. And that's us. And we are, and so the Holy Faith guides us through Catholic land movement, as it did the forefathers of the Catholic land movements in Scotland and Great Britain. Through Father Vincent McNabb and the prelates that were behind it. And so, I'm thankful to be part of Catholic land movement. It's the third way is here, and so when it comes to a follow-up, John, Dr. Haugen, Mike, and I are happy to talk about further Texas development. We know the stakes are high, and as brothers, we're here to lock arms and building with one hand and a rosary in the other, as Saint Louis de Montfort says. That's what we're here to do. So there's nothing else to do. This is the good fight, and so we're here to fight the good fight with you. And it's an honor to come on your podcast there, Dr. Haugen.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. This is so fundamental in the way you guys mix the pragmatism in with the principles, in with Christ as King and Christ's kingship that's going to pull all this together. And yet it wasn't overly idealistic, and that it just dealt with the realism of the reality that you can't just, buy something and magically it's going to happen. That it, with grace, when it's done properly, it will build according to its needs. And I am going to bring the links because I'm sure people are going to have some questions and want to have some resources. So I will leave links to both of our guests today, Mike and Andrew. Absolutely spectacular presentation. This is really exciting. And I'll say in my private life, for the longest time, I always just imagine being able to have a community like this. Maybe it'll happen in my life and maybe it don't, but maybe it will not. As a youngster, at one point I wanted to be in New York City, and I've experienced the hollowness of that. And I know people live there, and sometimes you have your little sub communities there. I'm not gonna, but for me, I had that emptiness of that. And, plus with me kind of being separated from what I knew, family and stuff like that, I felt where they're trying to take us with these stack and pack communities. And what you're saying, there's something deep that resonates inside of me. And the idea of, and maybe it won't appeal to somebody, but like butchering a hog and sharing that and having grace with other Catholics and knowing you all believe the same thing in these postmodern communities that everybody, in the fragmentation of life, that if somebody could even experience some of that, it would be such a grace. And I'll have you finish for us, please, Mike.
If I can communicate anything, Doctor, in this brief time, hour and a half that we've had together, what you have written on your heart that you want to experience a restoration of the real with a community and with other Catholics who recognize what real is, that is written on so many hearts, and you are not alone. You are not alone in wanting to feel that, experience that, and grow that. And I can't say to you, I don't know what God's will is with any of this stuff. I don't know where society's going necessarily. I don't know what the next turn of the Catholic land movement will be. Maybe we'll get $1 million. Maybe, there'll be 100 chapters. Maybe it'll all, collapse. I don't know. But what I do know is that there are thousands. What my experience with the land movement is brought to me is that there are thousands of people across the world who share with you what is on.
I think we might have dropped Mike. John, you wanted to say
Yeah.
something?
It
Go
just
ahead.
popped in my head. It's just like an epiphany. It's no, Protestantism is it's collapsed. It's metastasized into 45,000 different cancers,
Mhm.
and you can see that with all the new churches popping up. And then you're in rural Texas or the rural South, mainly Southwest. You have the cowboy churches. They're non-denominational. It was founded by Freemasons. I've researched it, and they're kind of where everyone goes. It's their Protestant land movement, and they all go. I've been to meetings at them, and they all have Trump hats on, and they're all talking with the stickers on their car says, has guns and shooting and everything you can think of, and that's the reaction. Well, by God, it's the Old Testament, eye for an eye, and you can just see their whole philosophy's collapsed. And here the Catholic land movement is entering into that void. It's filling that void, and they will look to us in the future, and there'll be converts from this. I promise you. the the church, the tradition, the dogma, the phenomenal history, and the militancy of Catholics standing up, the Crustados or the Vendée or wherever, we're made for times like this.
Yeah.
What an opportunity to go out there and defend God's creation, and to do it with Catholics and rebuild the faith, and do it at the parish level with Catholic subsidiarity. We don't need a cowboy church. We have our parish, or hopefully, traditional. And if not, then it's a way to spread tradition back, and reseed it. Yeah, so I think it's brilliant. I'm really appreciate to be on the call with you all.
Yeah, no, it was great. So Andrew, do you want to just say one last thing and then we'll say goodbye?
Yeah, the Jays must have cut Mike's internet. 'Cause no, a quote comes to mind by Father Vincent McNabb, and he's speaking of Pope Leo the 13th and his encyclical called Libertas. Talks about true liberty. Oh, you're back, Mike. Okay, great. And so, he just says, I think a great quote to end is by Father Vincent McNabb.
Okay.
True liberty of the sons and daughters of God. He says that the family is the defense of liberty, and the homestead is the defense of the family. And so I think that's what we want to maintain, and it's what we're working for. And so Mike and I are happy to be on the podcast, and we're here to help anyone who's interested in joining their local Catholic Land Movement chapter, starting another Catholic Land Movement chapter if you don't have one near you, and then Dr. Haugen and John working with you in whatever capacity we can. We love your message and your content, your focus. So any way that we can help, we're here.
Excellent. So that's a beautiful ending, and we're going to leave the links in there. And as usual, everybody that's joined us, I want to thank you very much for staying tuned with Dr. Deep State and our episode today, Catholic Land Movement. We had a great time with all of you. So I hope we can all meet up again and talk a little bit further about the movement.